Hello, BTK. Three seemingly harmless letters hide a terrible truth that has haunted America for decades. Arrest, torture, murder. BTK stands for these three barbaric actions. From the 1970s to 1990s, Wichita and North City in Kansas were plunged into the darkness of an invisible fear. The three letters of BTK are like a whisper of death that terrifies the locals. Which devil committed such disgusting crimes? He blatantly left his signature. To solve this mystery, let's go back in time to 1974. On January 15, 1974, a sunny Tuesday in Wichita, Kansas, known as the aviation capital, Wichita was on the rise. Here, the Otero family lives a simple and happy life. Father Joseph Otero, 38 years old, is a hardworking man. He and his wife Julie have 5 lovely children together. The whole family of 7 lives together in warm pants. That morning, as usual, Otero and his wife took their 3 older children to school. There are only 2 children left at home, 11-year-old Joseph Jr. and 9-year-old Josephine. 2 innocent children are looking forward to their parents' return. After taking their children away, Otero and his wife returned home. The whole family was enjoying short, peaceful moments when a car stopped near the house. A ghostly figure got out of the car, secretly climbed over the back fence, and successfully cut off the phone line. This cold-blooded intruder left a small knife on the lawn behind. Just as he was about to sneak into the house, 11-year-old Joseph Jr. led his dog to the back door and faced the stranger directly. Facing the child who suddenly appeared, the intrusion quickly pulled out a pistol in his pocket and pointed it directly at the boy's head. The innocent child didn't seem to be aware of the danger lurking, but curiously asked, "Uncle, are you playing games with me?" The other guy didn't answer, just signaled the boy to go back into the house with his eyes. Joseph Jr. seemed to hesitate a little, but in the end he obeyed. The man followed closely behind. Inside the house, Otero and his wife were stunned by the terrifying scene. Their youngest son was being pointed a gun at his head by a stranger. At this time, Josephine understood what was happening and burst into tears. The intruder raised a cold voice, claiming to be a fugitive from California, warning them not to move, otherwise he would shoot. Under the threat of the gun, the Otero couple did not dare to resist. They did as he said, took the children to the floor. After that, he herded everyone into a bedroom and tightly bound their hands and feet with rope. The rope dug deep, causing Mr. and Mrs. Otero to writhe in pain. Their limbs went numb, blood circulation was cut off. They pleaded for him to loosen the ropes, but were met only with despair. Next, he turned to Julie with another rope and mercilessly ended the life of the mother. Witnessing their parents being brutally murdered, the 2 children screamed in horror, afraid that their cries would draw the attention of neighbors. The intruder took 2 t-shirts and a plastic bag, covering the head of 11-year-old Joseph Jr. Then an even more horrifying scene unfolded. He dragged 9-year-old Josephine into the basement. He stripped her naked and tied her to a dirty sewage pipe. He asked, "Do you have a camera in the house? I want to capture this wonderful moment." When she said no, he replied, "You'll be going to heaven just like your family." The poor girl was then savagely murdered. After committing the crime, he calmly left the house and drove away. However, halfway down the road, he suddenly remembered the knife he had left on the lawn behind the house, as if possessed. He turned the car around and returned to the scene to retrieve the weapon, narrowly avoiding exposing his identity. When night fell, the 3 older children of the Otero family returned home from school. But instead of a warm family dinner, what awaited them were the cold corpses of their parents and 2 younger siblings. The horror and anguish overwhelmed them. They tried to call the police only to discover that the phone line had been cut. In desperation, they ran to a neighbor's house for help. Upon receiving the report, the police quickly arrived at the scene. It was a modest 1-story house with gray roof tiles, white walls, and a fenced backyard. The scene inside was horrific. Even veteran officers couldn't help but shudder. 4 lives had been cruelly taken. From the evidence at the scene, it was clear that the killer had meticulously planned this bloody massacre. At that time, surveillance cameras were not yet common. The police could only investigate by questioning nearby neighbors. But all efforts seemed in vain. The Oteros were known as kind and friendly people in the neighborhood, never involved in any conflict. So who was this demon that had so mercilessly destroyed this family? He didn't even spare the two innocent children. This horrifying massacre spread like a plague throughout every corner of Wichita. The police launched a large-scale investigation, but still could not find any valuable leads. The tragic death of the Otero family became a mystery with no answer, casting a dark shadow in Wichita's history. Just 3 months later, another tragedy struck. Catherine Bright and her brother Kevin Bright discovered that someone had broken into their home. In the struggle with the intruder, Kevin was lucky to escape thanks to his fierce resistance. As he fled, he shouted desperately for help on the empty street. Unfortunately, his sister wasn't as lucky. She was stabbed multiple times by the killer and died shortly after. The masked murderer fled in a black Jeep Cherokee. Because of the mask, Kevin couldn't get a clear look at the killer's face, only vaguely remembering the car model. These two cases had disturbing similarities. Both were home invasions with extreme levels of violence. This led the police to strongly suspect that the same perpetrator was behind them. For the next 2 years, no similar murders occurred in Wichita. However, this was only the calm before the storm. In May 1977, Shirley Vian, a 24-year-old single mother, was brutally murdered in her own home. Her 3 young children witnessed the entire tragedy. According to their testimonies, the killer wore a mask, tied their mother to the bedpost, covered her head with a plastic bag, and strangled her to death. Even more horrifying, he had planned to kill the children too. But their heart-wrenching cries and the sudden ringing of the telephone startled him. He panicked and fled the scene. Thankfully, the children escaped death by a hair's breadth. The police were once again forced to refocus on the series of murders that had happened over the past 3 years. They suspected the killer had returned. Fear blanketed Wichita. Residents reinforced their doors, heightened their alertness, and did everything to protect themselves and their families from becoming the next victims. The most terrifying part was that just 9 months later, death struck again. In December 1977, Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old woman, became the next victim. This time, the killer was even more audacious. After committing the murder, he called the police from a public phone, coldly informing them that Nancy Fox had been killed at her home and asking them to come clean up the scene. This phone call enraged the police and put them under unprecedented pressure. They realized they were not only dealing with a cold-blooded killer, but also a narcissistic, twisted criminal who craved attention and derived perverse pleasure from his crimes. While police were at a dead end in December 1978, the killer sent a letter directly to a Wichita television station. In the letter, he boldly claimed responsibility for all of the murders that had occurred in Wichita since 1974. He gave himself the name BTK and arrogantly explained that it stood for Bind, Torture, Kill. He demanded that people refer to him by that name. In the same letter, he complained that the media had not given him enough attention. He wrote, "How many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper and everyone in the nation knows who I am?" These words exposed the full extent of his twisted psychology and his insatiable desire for murder and recognition. Along with the letter was a poem filled with mockery and bragging about the victim Nancy Fox, as if he were proudly displaying a masterpiece. His tone was disturbingly arrogant. In the letter, he claimed that his motive stemmed from a mysterious Factor X, a supernatural force that he said drove him to kill. He even compared himself to the Grim Reaper. The television station immediately turned the letter over to the police. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the police decided to take an unusual approach to respond to BTK's taunting. They broadcast a short, carefully produced video on the evening news. The video featured an image of an overturned pair of eyeglasses with the message, "Call the police chief now." These glasses had been found at one of the crime scenes. The police hoped that this message would provoke the killer to come forward. But things didn't go as planned. BTK didn't respond at all. The police could only warn the public that BTK had no clear pattern of killing. He could vanish for a while and then suddenly return. Aside from praying that there would be no more victims, the police seemed helpless. BTK sensed the police's powerlessness. He continued sending taunting letters, mocking their incompetence. The people of Wichita lived in constant fear, like birds terrified of traps. No one knew when BTK would strike again. A tense atmosphere engulfed the city. Time quietly passed. 11 years had gone by since BTK's first murder. Just as people began to forget his terrifying name, he resurfaced after years of silence. In 1985, using his familiar method, he murdered 53-year-old Maureen Hedge in Park City, just 10 kilometers from Wichita. He dumped the victim's body in a remote drainage ditch and covered it with branches as if discarding trash. A year later, in 1986, Vicky Wegerle, a 28-year-old woman, also fell victim to BTK's hands. After that, he disappeared once again, like a venomous snake hiding in the shadows for years. It wasn't until 1991 that he struck again, this time targeting 62-year-old Dolores Davis. Her body was discovered in a bush near a bridge. A young boy walking his dog noticed a strange smell in the air. His dog had sniffed out the victim's corpse. At this point, BTK had taken the lives of 10 innocent people. For years, the investigation made no progress. BTK was like a ghost. Every time he committed a murder, he left no trace at the scene, then vanished into thin air, sending the investigation into a dead end. Since the last murder of Dolores Davis in 1991, BTK seemed to have gone completely silent. For 13 years, he committed no further crimes. However, that didn't mean he was gone. In 2004, BTK suddenly re-emerged by sending 11 disturbing letters to local media outlets in Wichita. In May 2004, the Wichita Eagle newspaper received a letter signed Bill Thomas Kilman. In it, the sender claimed to be the one who had killed Vicky Wegerle in 1986. However, in that same year, a breakthrough finally came. After many years, the crime lab delivered a shocking update. Scientists had discovered male DNA under the fingernails of victim Vicky Wegerle. This discovery was like striking gold. The police immediately launched a large-scale DNA collection campaign targeting all adult men living in Wichita and Park City. This campaign consumed a significant amount of manpower and resources. It also raised some public concerns over privacy rights. Ultimately, police collected 1,300 DNA samples from men in the area. Unfortunately, none of them matched the DNA from the crime scene. Due to privacy laws, the court later ordered all collected samples to be destroyed. At the same time, the Wichita Eagle published a feature commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murders. Unexpectedly, this article infuriated BTK. He was outraged that the article barely mentioned him, feeling he was being forgotten. To reclaim the spotlight, the narcissistic killer resumed sending threatening letters to the newspaper and the police. This time, his goal didn't seem to be murder. It was more like a sick game of cat and mouse with the authorities. He used dolls arranged in the positions of his past victims and placed them inside boxes, which he then secretly left in various places around the city. He would call the police or media with vague clues, leading them to search for his macabre gifts. In February 2005, BTK sent another letter to the police. This time, his question was filled with arrogance. "If I send you a floppy disk, will you be able to trace it back to me? Be honest, I want to know." He was eager to test whether he could outsmart the police. The authorities seized the opportunity. Through the Wichita Eagle newspaper, they publicly responded to BTK's question. If he dared to send a floppy disk, they would definitely catch him. Sure enough, a few days later, BTK sent a floppy disk to the police. But the egotistical killer clearly underestimated the technical capabilities of law enforcement. Inside the floppy disk, police discovered a critical file. After conducting a technical analysis, they were able to trace the metadata of the file back to its source, a church called Christ Lutheran in Wichita. The file had been last edited by a man named Dennis. Following this clue, police identified a board member of the church named Dennis Rader who lived in Park City. Authorities did not rush to arrest him. Instead, they conducted discreet surveillance. To their astonishment, parked right in front of Dennis Rader's house was a black Jeep Cherokee, the same vehicle described years earlier by Kevin Bright, the surviving brother of one of BTK's victims. This detail strongly suggested that Dennis Rader might be the serial killer BTK, the man police had been hunting for decades. However, circumstantial evidence alone was not enough for an arrest. Police needed something more. Through further investigation, they found that Dennis Rader approximately 60 years old at the time, had a wife and 2 children, a son and a daughter named Carrie. Carrie had attended Kansas State University and, during a routine health checkup at the campus clinic, had submitted a DNA sample. Police obtained that sample and compared it to the DNA found under Vicky Wagerly's fingernails. The result was staggering. The 2 DNA samples were a familial match. This confirmed the police's theory. Dennis Rader, Carrie's father, was indeed the infamous BTK killer who had eluded justice for decades. On February 25, 2005, after gathering sufficient evidence, police officially arrested Dennis Rader and charged him with first-degree murder. A full-scale search was launched of his car, house, and every piece of property he owned. Investigators found suspicious files on his computer. In an outdoor shed, they discovered a pair of black stockings, a horrifying mask, and a cylindrical container. When Rader's family found out that the man they had loved and lived with all their lives was BTK, they were devastated. To them, Dennis Rader had always been a gentle husband and a loving father. They could not imagine that he was the same monster who had murdered without remorse. The truth was now undeniable. Rader's daughter, Carrie, had always been close to her father since she was a child. He often took her fishing. In her eyes, her father was always a gentle, patient man who taught her many life lessons. She had never doubted his character, not even once. When she first heard about the horrifying murders committed by BTK, her father gently comforted her, telling her everything would be okay. She could never have imagined that the man who had always protected and cared for her was actually BTK. For her, this revelation was nothing short of a never-ending nightmare. After his arrest, Dennis Rader appeared eerily calm. He seemed very concerned about what kind of punishment he would receive, and whether prison life would be comfortable. He even worried whether other inmates would use violence against him. During interrogation, he confessed to all his crimes. His first murder was in January 1974, when he slaughtered the Otero family. Surprisingly, his original target had only been Julie Otero. 2 months before the murder, he had been watching her, noting that she took her children to school every morning. At first, he planned to attack her on the street but couldn't find a good opportunity. Eventually, he recklessly broke into the Otero home. Even though Julie, her husband, and 2 children were all home at the time, Rader didn't hesitate. He murdered each of them one by one. After committing that first crime, he felt an indescribable thrill, as if he had entered a completely dark new world. What made him even more elated was that the police failed to catch him. That failure only fueled his arrogance, making him even more daring. 3 months later, his next target was Catherine Bright. He called this mission Project Lights Out. That day, he quietly approached Catherine's house, expertly cut the window screen, and slipped inside. He waited patiently for his victim to return home. But time passed minute by minute and Catherine still hadn't arrived. Just as he was cleaning up the broken glass on the floor, something unexpected happened. Catherine returned, but she wasn't alone. Her brother was with her. This was not part of Dennis Rader's plan. He immediately pulled out his gun and pointed it at the siblings, pretending to be a fugitive in need of food and money. Under the threat of a gun, Catherine and her brother were forced into a bedroom. Because Rader hadn't brought any restraints, he improvised, using towels, bed sheets, and whatever he could find in the room to tie them up. He separated the siblings, locking them in different rooms. He then went into the living room and turned the volume on the stereo to maximum, trying to drown out the noises of what was about to happen. He entered the room where Catherine's brother was being held, planning to eliminate this potential threat first. However, when he opened the door, he discovered that the young man had managed to free himself. A fierce struggle broke out immediately. During the fight, Dennis Rader fired a shot at the victim's head, but the bullet missed its mark. Thinking quickly, Catherine's brother collapsed to the floor and pretended to be dead. Dennis Rader didn't bother checking the body. Instead, he turned his attention to Catherine. When Catherine learned her brother had been shot, she completely broke down and screamed in terror. Rader tried to control her, but she continued to resist. Fearing that the neighbors might hear the commotion, he altered his plan. Instead of strangling her with a rope, he pulled out a sharp knife and stabbed her multiple times in the chest. At that critical moment, Catherine's brother suddenly sprang up. using all his remaining strength to run out of the house. He shouted desperately for help as he fled down the street. Shocked, Dennis Rader panicked, ran outside, jumped into his car, and fled the scene. Because he always wore a mask while committing his crimes, even though Catherine's brother had survived, he couldn't identify Rader's face clearly. After this dangerous incident, Dennis Rader was frightened. He went quiet for the next 3 years. It wasn't until May 1977 that he began searching for a new target. His intended victim at the time was a different young woman, but when he arrived at her house, she wasn't home. Frustrated, he decided to find someone else. He noticed a little boy playing alone by the roadside and approached him gently, taking out a photo from his pocket and showing it to the child. The photo was of his own wife and daughter. Rader lied and said he was a detective searching for the two people in the picture, and asked if the boy recognized them. The child shook his head. Seizing the opportunity, Rader persuaded the boy to take him home so his mother could look at the picture. The innocent boy agreed without hesitation. He led Dennis Rader to his house. When the door opened, Shirley Vian appeared. She accepted the photo with a puzzled expression, examined it carefully, and said she didn't know the people in it. At that moment, as she lowered her guard, Dennis Rader pulled out a gun and forced his way into the house. Once again, he used his usual trick, pretending to be a fugitive on the run from the police who needed to hide in their home. The boy and 2 other children were terrified and burst into tears. Taking advantage of the chaos, Dennis Rader herded the 3 children into the bathroom and locked the door. To ensure they wouldn't escape, he and Shirley Vian, who was trembling in fear, carried a heavy chair to block the bathroom door. To calm the crying children, Rader even tossed a few toys and a blanket into the bathroom. But nothing could soothe their fear. Once he had secured the children, he dragged Shirley, who was still sobbing uncontrollably, into the bedroom. He tied her tightly to the bed, then placed a plastic bag over her head. After that, he began to attack Shirley in a savage, inhumane way. Throughout the ordeal, she repeatedly begged for her life in desperation, but her heart-wrenching cries only made Dennis Rader more excited. Eventually, he used a rope to cruelly end her life. Just a door away, the cries of the 3 children could still be heard echoing from the bathroom. Their young, fragile minds were forced to endure an unimaginable horror. Dennis Rader intended to kill all 3 children to eliminate any witnesses. But just as he was about to do so, the phone in the house suddenly rang. The unexpected sound startled Rader, and in a moment of panic, he gave up on killing the children and fled the scene in a hurry. 9 months later, he set his sights on 25-year-old Nancy Fox. He called this mission Operation Fox Hunt, a twisted play on words, as Fox was both the animal and Nancy's last name. This choice of name reflected his deeply narcissistic and obsessive need to control everything. Like a cunning predator, Rader broke into Nancy's house while she was away. When she returned, he suddenly appeared and ambushed her. Nancy screamed and threatened to call the police, but Rader coldly informed her that he had already cut the phone line. He forced her into submission, tied her up, and killed her with calculated cruelty. But what made this murder even more disturbing was what he did next. Dennis Rader picked up a public telephone and called the police himself. He calmly reported Nancy Fox's murder, and even gave them the address, urging them to come collect her body. This act showed how emboldened he had become. It was no longer just about killing. Rader wanted to be seen, to be feared, and to challenge the very people chasing him. The police were furious and under immense pressure. They realized they weren't just dealing with a cold-blooded killer, but with a narcissistic, perverted criminal who craved attention and took sick pleasure from his crimes. While the police were still struggling, in December 1978, BTK sent another letter, this time directly to a TV station in Wichita. In the letter, he arrogantly claimed responsibility for all the murders that had occurred in Wichita since 1974. He officially introduced himself as BTK and explained that the name stood for Bind, Torture, Kill. He demanded that everyone call him by this name. In the letter, he complained that the media hadn't given him enough attention. He wrote, "How many people do I have to kill to get my name in the paper and be known across the country?" These words revealed the full extent of his twisted obsession with fame and his sick desire for recognition. Along with the letter, he included a poem filled with mocking, boasting language about his victim, Nancy Fox, as though he were showing off a masterpiece. His tone was shockingly arrogant. He also claimed that his motivation to kill came from a mysterious Factor X, which he described as a supernatural force. He even compared himself to the Grim Reaper. The TV station quickly turned the letter over to the police. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the police decided to respond to BTK in an unusual way. They produced a short video and broadcast it on the evening news. The video showed a pair of glasses flipped upside down with the message, "Call the police chief now." The glasses had been found at one of the crime scenes. The police hoped this message would provoke the killer to reach out again. But things didn't go as planned. BTK gave no response. The police had no choice but to warn the public that BTK had no fixed pattern for his crimes. He could remain silent for long periods and then suddenly resurface. Other than hoping there would be no more victims, the police were essentially powerless. BTK, sensing the helplessness of law enforcement, continued sending mocking letters, ridiculing the police for their incompetence. The people of Wichita lived in constant fear, as if they were birds frightened by the sound of every twig snapping. No one knew when BTK would strike again. The tension hung heavily over the entire city. Time continued to pass quietly. It had been 11 years since BTK's first murder. Just when the public was beginning to forget the name that had once terrorized them, he reawakened from his silence. In 1985, BTK returned. Using his usual methods, he murdered 53-year-old Maureen Hedge in Park City, located just 10 kilometers from Wichita. He discarded her body in a remote drainage ditch, covering it with branches as if tossing away garbage. A year later, in 1986, 28-year-old Vicky Wegerle became his next victim. After that, he vanished once again, like a poisonous snake slipping back into hiding for years. It wasn't until 1991 that he resurfaced. His new target was 62-year-old Dolores Davis. Her body was found in the bushes near a bridge. A young boy was walking his dog when the animal picked up a strange scent, leading to the gruesome discovery of her corpse. By this point, BTK had taken the lives of 10 innocent people. For many years, the police investigation remained at a standstill. BTK was like a ghost. Each time he killed, he left no traces behind, then vanished as though he had never existed. The investigation repeatedly hit dead ends. Following the murder of Dolores Davis in 1991, his last known victim, BTK seemed to disappear into silence. For 13 years, he committed no new crimes. However, that didn't mean he was gone for good. In 2004, he suddenly returned to the public eye. That year, he sent 11 disturbing letters to various local media outlets in Wichita. In May 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter signed Bill Thomas Killman. In this letter, the sender claimed responsibility for the 1986 murder of Vicky Wegerle. But this same year brought unexpected hope. After many years, a breakthrough came from the forensic lab. Scientists had discovered male DNA underneath Vicky Wegerle's fingernails. This vital piece of evidence gave the police new momentum. They immediately launched a large-scale campaign to collect DNA samples from every adult male living in Wichita and Park City. The operation consumed a vast amount of resources and manpower and sparked public concern regarding privacy rights. In the end, police collected 1,300 DNA samples from local men, but disappointingly, none of them matched the killer's DNA. Due to privacy protections, the court ordered all of the samples destroyed after testing. Around the same time, the Wichita Eagle published a 30th anniversary memorial article on the Otero family murders. Unexpectedly, this article triggered BTK's fury. He was enraged that the article had barely mentioned him and felt slighted and forgotten. Seeking attention once again, the narcissistic serial killer resumed his disturbing communications, sending letters to both the newspaper and police. This time, however, it seemed he wasn't aiming to kill. Instead, he was playing a perverse game of cat and mouse with investigators. He used dolls posed to mimic the positions of his past victims and placed them inside boxes. Then, he secretly scattered these macabre gift boxes throughout the city. After that, he would call the police or the media, providing vague clues to lead them on a hunt to find these gruesome surprises. In February 2005, BTK sent another letter to the police. This time his question was full of smugness and arrogance. "If I send you a floppy disk, will you be able to trace it back to me? Tell me the truth, I want to know." He was desperate to find out if he could truly get away with it. The police seized this opportunity and publicly responded through the Wichita Eagle, saying that if he sent a floppy disk, they would definitely be able to track him down. Sure enough, just a few days later, BTK actually sent a floppy disk to the police. But this self-obsessed killer had clearly underestimated modern forensic capabilities. On that disk, police found a critical document. Through digital forensics, they traced the metadata and discovered that the file had been created and last modified at Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. Even more importantly, the document was last edited by someone named Dennis. Following this lead, the police identified a man named Dennis Rader, a member of the church's board of directors who lived in nearby Park City. Investigators did not arrest him immediately, but chose to observe him secretly. One shocking detail stood out. Parked right in front of Dennis Rader's home was a black Jeep Cherokee, the exact same vehicle described years earlier by Kevin Bright, the surviving brother of one of BTK's victims. This detail strongly suggested that Dennis Rader might indeed be the BTK serial killer the police had been searching for all these years. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. The police needed definitive proof. Through further investigation, they learned that Dennis Rader, around 60 years old, had a wife and 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter. His daughter, Carrie, had studied at Kansas State University. At the university's medical center, Carrie had previously submitted a DNA sample during a routine health screening. Police obtained access to that DNA sample and compared it to the DNA found under the fingernails of victim Vicky Wagerle years ago. The results were astonishing. The 2 DNA samples were a familial match. This finding nearly confirmed the police's theory. Dennis Rader, Carrie's father, was indeed the notorious BTK serial killer who had evaded justice for decades. On February 25, 2005, after obtaining solid evidence, the police officially arrested Dennis Rader on charges of first-degree murder. A thorough search operation was launched, targeting his vehicles, home, and all surrounding properties. Eventually, police uncovered suspicious files on his computer. In an outdoor shed, they found a pair of black stockings, a terrifying mask, and a cylindrical container. When Dennis Rader's family learned that the man they had lived with for so many years was in fact BTK, they were completely devastated. To them, Dennis had always been a gentle, loving husband and a devoted father. They could not comprehend how the man who had sat at their dinner table, who had tucked them into bed, could be the same monster who murdered people in cold blood. The harsh truth was now undeniable. Rader's daughter, Carrie, had always been very close to her father. Since she was little, he often took her fishing and spent quality time with her. In her heart, her father was a calm, patient man who taught her many important life lessons. She had never once doubted his character. When she first heard about the BTK murders in the news, her father gently reassured her, saying that everything would be all right. She never imagined that the man who had always protected and comforted her was actually BTK. For her, this revelation was like a nightmare from which there was no escape. After being arrested, Dennis Rader remained eerily calm. He seemed more concerned about what kind of punishment he would face and whether life in prison would be comfortable. He even worried about whether other inmates would use violence against him. During questioning, he confessed to all of his crimes. He admitted that his first murders occurred in January 1974, when he killed the Otero family. Shockingly, his original target had only been Julie Otero. 2 months before committing the crime, he had stalked her and learned her daily routine, how she took her children to school each morning. At first, he had planned to attack her on the street, but never found the right opportunity. Eventually, he decided to break into the Otero home, even though Julie, her husband, and 2 children were all present. He didn't hesitate. One by one, he murdered each of them. After this first murder spree, he felt an intense sense of euphoria, as if he had just stepped into a new, dark world. What made it even more thrilling for him was that the police hadn't caught him. This only boosted his ego. making him bolder and more reckless. 3 months later, his next target was Catherine Bright. He named this operation Project Lights Out. On the day of the crime, he quietly approached Catherine's house, skillfully cut the window screen, and slipped inside. He patiently waited for his victim to come home. But minute after minute passed, and Catherine had yet to appear. Just as he was cleaning up the broken glass, something unexpected happened. Catherine returned home, but she wasn't alone. Her younger brother, Kevin, was with her. This completely disrupted Dennis Rader's plan. He immediately drew his gun and confronted them, pretending to be a fugitive who needed food and money. Under the threat of the weapon, Catherine and Kevin were forced into a bedroom. Rader hadn't brought any ropes or tools, so he had to improvise, using towels, bed sheets, and whatever else he could find to tie them up. He then separated the two siblings into different rooms. He turned the stereo to full volume to mask any potential noise, then entered the room where Kevin was restrained. He planned to eliminate the male first to avoid resistance. But Kevin had managed to partially free himself and suddenly lunged at Rader. A fierce struggle broke out. Rader fired at Kevin's head, but the bullet only grazed his face. Kevin, thinking fast, dropped to the floor and pretended to be dead. Rader, convinced he had succeeded, turned and went into the other room to deal with Catherine. Hearing the shot, Catherine screamed in terror. Rader tried to restrain her, but she resisted fiercely. Worried that the neighbors might hear, Rader changed his plan. Instead of strangling her, he grabbed a knife from the room and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest. Just then, Kevin, still alive, gathered all his remaining strength and fled from the house. Running down the street, he shouted for help. Panicked, Dennis Rader also fled, jumped into his car, and sped away. Although Kevin had survived and could give a statement, Rader had been wearing a mask during the attack, so Kevin could not clearly identify his face, only recalling a vague build and the vehicle he drove. This close call frightened Dennis Rader, and he didn't commit another murder for the next 3 years. But in 1977, he once again went hunting. This time, his original target wasn't home. Frustrated, Rader searched for a new victim. He noticed a small boy playing alone by the road and approached him. Taking out a photo of his wife and daughter, he lied and said he was a detective looking for them. He asked if the boy recognized the people in the photo. The innocent child shook his head. Then Rader asked if the boy's mother might recognize them and convinced him to lead him to their house. The trusting boy led Dennis Rader to his home. When the door opened, 24-year-old Shirley Vian stood there. She accepted the photo with a confused expression, examined it, and said she didn't recognize the people in it. At that moment, as her guard was down, Rader pulled out a gun and forced his way into the house. Once again, he pretended to be a fugitive on the run who just needed a place to hide. Shirley and her 3 young children were terrified. To control the situation, Rader herded the children into the bathroom and locked the door. He and Shirley placed a heavy chair in front of it to block their way out. He even tossed in some toys and a blanket to calm the children, almost as if he was being considerate. But nothing could mask the evil intentions behind his actions. Once the children were locked away, he dragged Shirley into the bedroom. He tied her tightly to the bed, then covered her head with a plastic bag. Ignoring her desperate pleas, he coldly strangled her to death with a rope. Meanwhile, the children were just steps away, crying and screaming inside the bathroom. Their helpless cries echoed as their mother was brutally murdered. Afterwards, Dennis Rader considered killing the children as well to eliminate all witnesses. But just as he was about to carry out the next step, the phone in the house suddenly rang. The unexpected sound startled him. Worried that someone might have become suspicious and was trying to contact Shirley, he panicked and fled the scene, sparing the children's lives. 9 months later, he selected 25-year-old Nancy Fox as his next target. He called this murder Operation Fox Hunt, a disturbing play on her last name. He broke into her home, waited for her to return, and then ambushed her. After forcing her into submission, he tied her up and strangled her. But this time, he took things even further. After killing Nancy, Dennis Rader walked to a public phone and called the police. Calmly and coldly, he told them that there had been a murder and gave them Nancy's home address. He then hung up. This act sent shockwaves through the police department. It was clear that they were not dealing with a killer who simply wanted to get away. This was someone who wanted attention, fame, and power. A man who found pleasure in controlling not just his victims, but the entire city of Wichita. Dennis Rader didn't just want to kill, he wanted to be known. Following the murder of Nancy Fox, the police were deeply shaken. They knew they were dealing with a man who was not only ruthless, but also cunning and egotistical. Still, despite numerous efforts, investigators remained empty-handed. BTK seemed like a ghost. He came and went without a trace. After Nancy's case, there was a temporary silence. But in 1978, BTK could no longer contain his urge for attention. He sent a letter to a local television station, KKTV in Wichita. In it, he confessed to being responsible for 7 murders and once again demanded to be called BTK, standing for bind, torture, kill. He even ranked his victims by name, as if creating a sick scoreboard of death. He mocked the police, taunted the media, and expressed frustration that he wasn't being given enough attention. The tone of the letter was filled with arrogance and twisted pride, once again revealing his craving for notoriety. Included in the letter was a horrifying poem dedicated to one of his victims, Shirley Vian. The verses were crude, disturbing, and showed a total lack of remorse. In the poem, he fantasized about her suffering, almost romanticizing the act of murder as an artistic performance. At this point, Wichita was plunged into terror. Parents no longer let their children walk to school alone. People double-checked their locks every night. The atmosphere in the city was tense and suffocating. Everyone feared they might be the next target. However, the police still had no clear suspect. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no clues. His methods were meticulous, cold, and well-planned. He could disappear for years and then suddenly strike again. The public started calling him a phantom killer. Years passed. Many began to believe that BTK had either died, been arrested for an unrelated crime, or moved elsewhere. The fear gradually faded. People tried to return to their normal lives. Then in 1985, the horror returned. Dennis Rader murdered 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, a woman who lived just down the street from him. This was no random killing. It was someone he knew. This shocked investigators because it was the first time BTK had murdered someone from his own neighborhood. It showed just how bold and confident he had become. He hid her body in a ditch and covered it with debris just like before. Once again, he vanished without a trace. The police had no leads and the case quickly went cold. Rader didn't kill again until 1986 when he strangled 28-year-old Vicki Wagerly in her home. Once again, he left no evidence behind. No one suspected him, not even his family. At this point, BTK had murdered 10 people and then he vanished. After the murder of Vicki Wagerly in 1986, Dennis Rader disappeared without a trace. Over the following years, there were no new victims. Some believed he had either died or moved away. Others thought he may have been arrested for an unrelated crime. The fear that once haunted Wichita slowly began to fade. But in reality, Dennis Rader was still living quietly in Park City, Kansas. He continued his job as a city compliance officer and remained active in his church. No one suspected that the man who enforced neighborhood regulations and led church meetings was, in fact, the notorious BTK killer. Rader lived a seemingly ordinary life. He was a husband, a father, a church president, and a scout leader. But behind closed doors, he maintained a twisted fantasy world. He kept detailed journals of his crimes, collected news clippings, photos, and even mementos from his victims. These items were hidden in secret compartments around his home. In 1991, he committed what would be his last known murder, Dolores Davis, a 62-year-old woman. After that, he stopped killing. For the next 13 years, he went silent. No letters, no victims. The BTK case went cold once again. Then, in 2004, a local newspaper published an article marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murders. The article barely mentioned BTK. This enraged Rader. After years of silence, he felt forgotten. His ego couldn't tolerate being ignored. Craving attention once more, he resumed contact with the media and police. Between 2004 and early 2005, he sent a series of cryptic packages and letters. Some contained crime scene photos, victim IDs, or bizarre puzzles. Others included Barbie dolls tied up in the same way his victims had been. He was no longer focused on murder. Now his goal was control, dominance, and fame. In one of his letters, he asked the police whether a floppy disk could be traced. The police replied through a newspaper ad, assuring him it would be safe. Falling for the trap, Rader sent a purple floppy disk in early 2005. What he didn't realize was that digital forensics could extract metadata from the disk, which revealed the file had been created at Christ Lutheran Church by a user named Dennis. Investigators quickly traced the lead to Dennis Rader, a local church leader and city employee in Park City. The final piece of the puzzle came when DNA from his daughter matched samples found at a crime scene. It was enough to confirm his identity. Dennis Rader, the man who had terrorized Wichita for 3 decades, was finally arrested on February 25, 2005. In court, Dennis Rader calmly confessed to all 10 murders he had committed between 1974 and 1991. What shocked everyone was the cold, matter-of-fact tone he used to describe each killing, as if he were recounting routine tasks. He referred to his murders as projects and even gave each victim a code name. In his confession, he detailed how he stalked his victims, planned the attacks, and what he felt during each killing. His chilling descriptions showed no remorse, only pride and control. Rader told the court that he felt an uncontrollable urge to kill, driven by what he called Factor X, a dark force he believed compelled him to commit these heinous crimes. He compared himself to other infamous killers like Jack the Ripper and Son of Sam, placing himself in their company. On August 18, 2005, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison, 1 for each of his victims. At the time, Kansas did not have the death penalty, so life imprisonment was the maximum sentence available. The judge made sure Rader would never be released, stating that his crimes were so heinous, so brutal, and so inhuman that they defy understanding. During sentencing, the victims' families had the opportunity to speak. Their words were filled with pain, rage, and heartbreak. Some cried, others trembled with anger. One woman looked Rader in the eye and said, "You are an evil, cowardly man. May you rot in your cell for the rest of your life." Rader, seated quietly, occasionally nodded but otherwise showed little emotion. After the trial, he was transferred to El Dorado Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Kansas. There, he lives alone in a small cell, isolated from other inmates for his own safety. He is allowed out for just 1 hour a day and is under 24-hour surveillance. Over time, Dennis Rader became the subject of books, documentaries, and psychological studies. Criminologists analyzed his behavior, trying to understand how a seemingly normal man, a father, a husband, a church leader, could harbor such evil. Many believe that Rader's need for control and recognition drove him to kill and later taunt the police and media. His story remains one of the most terrifying examples of how evil can hide behind the most ordinary masks. Today, BTK's name still sends chills down the spines of those who remember the decades-long nightmare he caused in Wichita. Though justice was finally served, the scars he left behind can never truly heal.